Well, good morning from Cottage Farmstead. As you can see, our summer garden is all pulled out and we have cleaned it up and have been trying to replant our fall crops as I've shared in some of our previous videos. We replanted kale for the 4th time this season, and it is still getting eaten by something this season. We think some deer got in one time, and we've also trapped a rat. Thus far, the only things to survive are our snow peas and our pansies, and at this rate, we may just let our large vegetable garden go fallow for the winter. In addition to removing all of the dead material from the garden that died with the frost, we're also removing all of the wood that was in the hugelkultur area of our garden. That was a failed experiment for us this year, as it really made it hard to weed. They were full of ants, and it just didn't let things grow as well as we had hoped. And while loofah grows crazy in the summer, it does not like the cold, so our first frosty night, the whole plant died. And unfortunately, any of the loofah that had not fully ripened and mostly dried on the vine is no longer usable as sponges. But thankfully, before the frost, I was able to harvest a handful of loofah that we'll be using for our seed saving and making our own homemade sponges. And as you just heard, loofah are full of seeds, so it's so easy to save them for next year. So on the blossom end of the loofah, there is a weak point that's very easy to pop off with your finger or with a quick tap on the ground. And the seeds will just start pouring out, especially if you bounce it against the side of a bucket. And like I said earlier, loofah are full of seeds, so you will not have a shortage for next year's garden. To clean up the seeds a bit, I do a process that's called winnowing. Since we have breezy weather this day, I am doing it in the breeze, but you could also do this in front of a fan, and you're just going to pour the seeds from one bucket to another and just let the lightweight chaff blow away. And next comes the peeling process. So the loofah skin is pretty tough, but it can be peeled by hand. The easiest way I have found to peel loofah is to crush it a bit by rolling it against a hard surface with my feet. I find it easier when I'm sitting in a chair. And I found that this really helps to get the loofah sponge to separate from the skin a little bit easier, and then I'm able to peel it in larger chunks than if I was just doing it by hand. And not all of the loofah dries perfectly on the vine. Some of them will get a little bit of mold into them, and what I do is I usually just cut it right where it starts getting moldy, and then I will be treating it with bleach later in order to make sure it doesn't continue growing. And while this step isn't necessary, I have found that soaking my loofah in a 10-to-1 bleach solution does make my sponges last a lot longer than if I did not get rid of some of the bacteria that may be growing in them already. So to cut them up, I like using a serrated knife. I happen to have a steak knife this day as my other serrated knife was dirty, but it does the job. And I like cutting them up before I soak them in the bleach solution, as it makes them fit into the bucket a lot easier. And I cut them into the sizes that I'm anticipating using them in the shower and in scouring the kitchen and in giving as gifts. So I let it sit in the bleach solution for about 24 hours, and when I come back the next day, you can see how much cleaner they are just by a simple overnight soak. After dumping out the bleachy water, I grab the garden hose and I start rinsing them off, getting all of the bleach out of it as much as I can, and then I set them out on a table to allow them to dry. As you can see, I have a few seeds I need to continue working out of the loofah, but for the most part, these will be perfectly ready to go after they finish drying. Well, I hope you enjoyed seeing the loofah harvest from start to finish, and it inspires you to grow these next year. I will link down below to a blog post that we wrote previously on how to do this process step by step if you prefer written instructions. Catch you next time.